519 days. That's how long it's been since Nintendo uploaded a Genesis game to the Nintendo Switch Online service. Now, after a year and a half, the long wait is finally over, and 3 classic Genesis games have been added to the expansion pack. I'm talking about games like Mercs, Vectorman, and ToeJam and Earl and Panic on Funkotron. Yeah, that's genuinely exciting and unexpected news. But are any of these games actually worth playing? To answer that question, I decided to flip through the pages of Electronic Gaming Monthly, Die Hard Game Fan, Machines Sega, and more classic magazines to see what the critics said back when these games first came out. Alright everybody, try to contain your excitement for another episode of Nintendo Switch Online Review Crew.
I said clean up your room, this isn't a game.
Son, the yard's not done. You think this is a game?
No way, but this is. Blockbuster Video gives you more action, more challenges, the newest and hottest video games you crave.
In my day, life was a challenge, not a game.
Well, now it's both at Blockbuster Video, where the challenge never ends.
After failing to make much of a dent in the 8-bit war, Sega regrouped and came up with a brand new plan for their 16-bit Genesis. And that was to rely on accurate recreations of arcade hits. And I'm not just talking about Sega's own heavy hitters, but also recreations of some of Capcom's top games. Obviously, this led to the massive success of releases like Strider and Ghouls and Ghosts. But Sega also adapted other, smaller Capcom classics that don't get as much attention these days. One of those games was Mercs, the action-packed sequel to Commando. First released in the arcades in 1990, it only took Sega a year to bring this run-and-gun shoot-'em-up to their Genesis. This port is most notable for not only including the original plot and levels from the arcade game, but also including a brand new mode with different levels and a new story. Sadly, the trade-off is that the Genesis version doesn't support 2-player co-op, one of the core features that made the arcade version so popular. Let's see if that's one of the things that kept critics from falling in love with Mercs. Now, when it comes to the reviews, the critics are really all over the place. The average is around 80%, but what I want to do is start at the bottom, the very bottom. That distinction belongs to Sega Power, who absolutely hated the game, giving it a score of 45%. If you have nothing better to do and are feeling unhappy with the world, then Mercs should suit you down to the ground. Mindless violence with the emphasis on mindless and, violence? It's still tedious and repetitive bunkum, though. Try to beat a maid if you want any kind of challenge. Alright, to be fair, Sega Power was the absolute outlier here, with the next lowest score actually being a 7 out of 10 from Mega Play. That's right in line with the 74% that we saw from Sega Pro and the 78% from Game Zone. With a score of 4 out of 5, Game Pro finds itself smack dab in the middle of the average. They argued that Mercs won't go down as the biggest and baddest blow-em-up adventure of them all, though it's good to the last annihilation for sure. For many gamers, it'll be tough to deal that final, satisfying death blow because you get limited continues in arcade mode and none in the original mode. If that doesn't faze you, however, your orders are to lock and load Mercs and save the prez. Further up the scale, we see Game Informer give Mercs an average score of 8.8 out of 10, which is exactly the same score as the 88% we saw from Mean Machines. Sega Force went one tick higher, giving it an 89%, while Megatech went even higher, cracking that 90% barrier. However, if you're still wanting the highest score, then look no further than computer and video games. Giving it a 92%, Tim Boone ordered you to strap on your best blast and booties and prepare for some hot stompin' action in the best blast I've seen on the Mega Drive in quite a while. Quite simply, Mercs is a magnificent conversion of a pretty spanky coin-op, with the unbelievable bonus of 2 different games stuffed onto one cart. Controlling your Merc is a joy as he stomps around the scrolling playfield packed full of bad guys to blow away at the touch of a trigger. And those end-of-the-level bosses blow everything else out of the water. Mercs is mega. The best blast I've seen in ages. Buy it, turn the lights down low, and turn your bedroom into an arcade. Because that's how good it is. Look, that CVG review is setting your expectations a little bit too high. While far from the best run-and-gun shooter on the Genesis, this is really another solid addition to the Nintendo Switch Online. With an average score of 79%, I say give it a play. You really could do a whole lot worse. While it certainly didn't look as good as Sonic or hit as hard as Streets of Rage, you really have to hand it to the 1991 release of ToeJam and Earl. It definitely left an impression. Here's a weird little co-op game that could have easily been overshadowed by Sega's surprisingly strong lineup. Yet it somehow turned out to be just quirky enough to stand out from the crowd and become an unexpected hit. And just like that, 2 years later, the funky duo returned with a side-scrolling sequel. Sure, the gameplay and style was completely different, but it still managed to keep the same spirit and sense of humor of the original. Plus, it had a lot of content and a shockingly long ending. No joke, you're gonna need to set aside the better part of an hour just to see how this game concludes. Now let's go ahead and see how all the critics reacted to these changes. When it comes to Electronic Gaming Monthly, they liked it about as much as the original, which is to say that they thought it was an okay adventure game. They gave this sequel an average score of 7 out of 10, which is down slightly from the 7.25 they gave the original. They explained that they're back and in an entirely new adventure. Fans of the original ToeJam and Earl will probably not be able to live without this game, and rightly so. There's more to explore this time around. The second time is a charm. Now, for what it's worth, EGM was the outlier here, with every other magazine giving Panic on Funkotron a much higher score. Sega Magazine went with an 88%, while Sega Power gave it a 90%. In fact, that's the same score that we saw over at GameFan, who did not disappoint when it came to their opinions. Take Skid as just one of the examples. I don't find these characters or the funk premise desirable at all. I think a heavy metal premise would sell better in the 90s, not that I'm a headbanger, dude. However, this is a great game. The play mechanics, graphics, layout, eye-popping color, and length of the game put it in a category with the best in the action genre, and the injected humor is excellent. The level of creativity is amazing. Kaylee liked it slightly more, calling ToeJam and Earl 2 a big step up from the original. One of the things that made the original ToeJam and Earl so successful was its funky humor and originality, and the same can be said here. The sound and music is great and the voice is excellent. But what stuck in my mind was how fun the game was to play. Bring on a third! Moving up the list, we see that Machines Sega gave the sequel a 91%, while Mega went with a 92%. That's the exact same score that we saw from the Australian magazine Hyper. Now for the highest score, we're once again going to have to check in with our good friends over at GamePro, who gave ToeJam and Earl 2 a perfect 5 out of 5 in their 53rd issue. They concluded that those radical rap masters ToeJam and Earl are back with a very cool new adventure. Bigger sprites, bigger levels, and Big Earl combined to make this one happening cart. With an average score of 89%, ToeJam and Earl in Panic on Funkotron actually improves on the 84% average of the first game. This series actually had some real momentum in 1993. Too bad it would take Sega another decade to count to 3. Honestly, I say give this one a play, but only if you're ready for a really, really long ending.
The following contains subtitles for our non-funk speaking audience.
Yo, what up, dog? I'm here to drop some knowledge about my boys ToeJam and who? Earl. The game's beat fresh. Bam! All that, boy. Yo, peep out my man DJ as he flex. And here go crazy Earl checking out the house in the hood. In other words, I highly recommend it.
To ToeJam and Earl Panic on Funkotron game and Sega Genesis, each sold separately.
Transitioning from one generation to the next can be tricky. Ideally, you want to get people excited enough to buy your new expensive console, but you also need to simultaneously have enough games for the old system so that it doesn't look like you're just abandoning the millions of people that made the last generation so successful. Nintendo accomplished this goal by releasing the Donkey Kong Country trilogy, side-scrolling platformers using 3D models that were designed to whet your appetite for the high-tech effects that you could do with the Nintendo 64. To counter, Sega released Vectorman, a run-and-gun shooter that also employed 3D models to prove that the Genesis might be old, but it can still hold its own in a fight. Well, Donkey Kong Country is certainly better remembered these days. Vectorman was a fun and engaging shooter that reminded gamers why they fell in love with the Genesis in the first place. And that's because of the fast-paced arcade-style action. Now let's go ahead and see what the critics thought of Sega's response to Donkey Kong Country. We're going to once again start with Electronic Gaming Monthly, whose critics were mostly impressed with this action game. On the low end, we had Mike, who said that the clean graphics and animation are the first thing I noticed about this game. It might just be me, but I found the levels and enemies can get boring after playing for some time. Overall, Vectorman is definitely a game to check out if you're looking for an addition to your Sega library. On a more positive note, Andrew proclaimed that Sega has a new mascot. Vectorman offers graphics that look like they're on a system other than the Genesis. The animation is really smooth. Surprisingly, Vectorman excels in the control department. It doesn't have anything really new, but it plays well. The gameplay is fast, and the action generally is intense, but not frustrating. Think Strider with a gun. EGM gave Vectorman an average score of 8.25 out of 10. For what it's worth, that score was actually on the low side, with only Hyper going lower with a 79%. Sega Power liked Vectorman much more than either of those two magazines, giving it a 90%. That's the same score you saw over at Machines Sega, where Marcus concludes that this is pretty smart in just about every sense. Visually, it has a detail and fluidity unusual to Mega Drive games, while the gameplay is satisfyingly fast and explosive. Vectorman himself is one of the most impressive aspects of this whole caboodle, a constantly moving collection of spheres loosely assembled into a humanoid shape. Gasp as he maneuvers himself into any firing position. Marvel at his multi-jointed limbs, which can adapt to any terrain. This is top quality stuff with just the right blend of fiddly platforming fun and mindless violence. All of which goes to show that writing off 16-bit gaming is very short-sighted indeed. Another magazine that didn't write off the 16-bit generation was Game Fan, who gave the game a 91%. Computer and video games went even higher, giving it a 96%. That means that it was actually one of the top-rated games of that year. However, if you're looking for the highest score, then we once again need to pay a visit to GamePro, who gave it a 5 out of 5. Now, despite the perfect score, they did complain that the techno music was annoying and that the action would have been a lot more fun with a second player. These few inconsistencies don't even make a dent in this otherwise awesome game. If you're looking for fast action and fantastic scenery, Vectorman has the balls you're looking for. While I've never been as big of a fan of Vectorman as some of these glowing reviews, I do like it and I can understand how it could average a score of 86%. It's still a lot of fun to this day and definitely worth checking out on the Switch, especially in between all those Donkey Kong Land games.
Enter the future. Vectorman, the most revolutionary game ever for Sega Genesis. And play to win for a chance at a $25,000 grand prize. Vectorman, resistance is futile.
Hey, thanks for watching me break down these classic reviews. If you liked what you saw here, then you should know that we post new episodes just like this one every time classic games get added to modern consoles. In fact, we just posted an episode yesterday because that's when Nintendo released Donkey Kong Land 2. We also posted an episode last Friday, which is when they released the first Donkey Kong Land game. I have no idea what's going on over at Nintendo. Now, sometimes go a month without even a single update, and now it's 3 announcements in less than a week? They know that it's a holiday week, right? And some of us have families we've got to get to. Anyway, all of that is in the playlist, so go give that a binge when you have a chance. You know the spiel. Now, here's the question I have for you. What the hell is going on over at Nintendo? No, seriously. At this point, it really wouldn't surprise me if Nintendo announces Donkey Kong Land 3 for Thanksgiving. Let me see your thoughts in the comments below. In other news, we'll be back on Thanksgiving with a Turkey Day special, followed by something on Friday. I guess we'll see what Nintendo does between now and then. If that sounds good to you, then I strongly recommend you click that subscribe button and support what we're doing here. Until then,